Hi, welcome to the Studio 14 tutorial. My name is Santiago Womer. I'll be helping you go through Studio 14. If you've never used it before, don't worry. We're going to start from the bottom. Now, before we begin, we want to make sure we open up the Slice app. Click on Preferences and make sure that Sync Studio One Sessions is enabled. That way the app tracks any Studio 14 projects, either synced or unsynced. Now let's open Studio 14. This is the welcome page. Now, before we create a new song, we want to navigate to the bottom and click on Configure Audio Device. This will show up as the playback and recording devices, and we can select our audio interface from this list. Now let's create a new song. We can choose from a template or create an empty song. I'm going to go ahead and create an empty song and call it My New Studio One. By clicking on this ellipsis, you can select the disk location of your Studio One project. Now, I'm going to put it in the Splice app folder. That way I know my project will be synced with Splice. The default location of this is actually inside your documents in /Studio One /songs folder. You can also select your song settings like sample rate, resolution, time base, song length, tempo, time signature, and key signature. Clicking on this will ensure that the audio files will stretch if you adjust the song tempo. This is useful when using Splice Sound, so make sure this is enabled. Now let's get started with navigation. At the top you're going to see transport for all the tools involving your mouse. You'll see a knife, an eraser, marker, scrub tool, and other various tools we can get to in more advanced features. Let's begin by creating an audio track. I'm going to name mine bass and select audio as my type of track. You can notice that there's instrument automation and folded track. Since my bass is a mono input, I'm going to make sure this is selected, and I'm going to make sure the input is correct. So as you notice, there are only input L and input R at the moment. My audio interface has more than 2 inputs. Well, you can adjust your routing through adding here new mono tracks or new stereo tracks. So I'm going to go ahead and add channels 3 and 4 mono and channels 3 and 4 stereo. In order to make sure the correct input is assigned, you will have to click on the grid. In this case, IP 3 and 4 correspond to L and R of input 3. I also want to rename these L and R because that is a bit misleading. It's actually 1 and 2. Now that we've set up our audio inputs and outputs, I want to make sure we name all of them before we leave this, or else it's going to be a bit confusing once you set up your recording inputs. So once I turn the track record enable, notice I'm seeing my meter go up. When I play a note, I can hear it back. Before we start recording, I would like to point out a few things at the bottom transport. We have a MIDI monitor here that will show you note on, note off messages and any other type of MIDI messages coming through the system. This is very useful if you have more than 2 MIDI input devices or are trying to route different things to different sides. So we can get to that later. You can also see we have a performance monitor. This is especially useful if you use a lot of plugins, as you can show the devices, and if I drag a new plugin, you'll see the CPU intensity for that track or that plugin. You also have here how many recording max days you have in your cache. In my case, 38/10 days. So 38 days and 10 hours. You also see bars, and you have your standard transport with playback functions, record button, and then this button, which we'll get to in a bit. These meters are related to this, and this is the looping feature, but we're not going to look at that just yet. Before anything, we're going to set up the metronome. So this button turns the metronome on and off, and this is your metronome settings button. You can select click and pre-count only, click and play, pre-count, and a pre-roll. And this you can adjust at any time, and it's very useful to store or load the preset. You can also change the sound or add your own sound. Next to the metronome, there is a timing and a key setting where you can adjust the different aspects of your song in that way. You can also select the tempo. This here is your output meter, and this is just your output volume master from the master fader. On this bottom right hand section, you'll see the browse, mix, and edit buttons. In the browse section, you can select different VSTs, instruments, loops, files, and even some nice PreSonus extras. We're going to go ahead and select the loop. I'm going to click on the Brazilian full and drag it to my transport. Notice this is a MIDI track. If you click here on the piano next to the name of the track, you'll see the instrument come up. And you can quickly switch between instruments by using these tabs. Now let's hear what this groove sounds like. Notice if I adjust the tempo, the groove will adjust to the time. We're going to want to keep this at like 110 and just see what that sounds like. So that's a very typical Brazilian samba groove. If we wanted to duplicate this MIDI, we just hit D on the keyboard and it will duplicate it by itself. So now we can get a nice 8-bar loop. And if we want to record by comping or loop record, it's very simple. Down here, this is the loop left and right, so basically beginning and end, and you can actually scrub this around. You'll notice this grayed out marker at the top will jump around depending on the location. To enable it, you can double click or you can click on this button. So we're going to want to adjust this to be exactly 8 bars. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And we can drag the top right hand corner of the loop and just slide it to the 9, or we can actually input 9 here and it will snap to the grid. If we want to loop record, we have to make sure Take Still Layers is enabled. In order to do that, select the record panel and make sure this option is on takes to layers. This will ensure once you hit the end of the 8th bar and you begin the new loop at the 1, you won't be deleting the take that you just did. This instead will actually put it in what it's called a layer, and you'll have several layers to pick from. Now before I start recording, I'm going to give myself a head count of 1 bar. So I'm going to make sure this pre-count is enabled and this record button is enabled. That way when I hit record, it'll give me 4 clicks to get myself ready. When I stop my recording, you'll see that each of these bass takes has its own layer. And I actually have a new tool on my cursor. This tool is used to select each section of the layer you want, and this way create the best of each take and put it all on your bass track. So I didn't like the beginning from the last take. I'm gonna go ahead and make sure it's the first one. I had a mistake at the end on my first take, and I can make sure this last one is visible. So let's just hear what it sounds like. Now there is a little scuff right here that I can also take care of. We'll just go ahead and select this whole section and leave it here. Make sure you enable the loop, and if you have to, drag it back to the 1 so you can still keep the loop. There you go. And now you have your quote-unquote perfect take. Using Studio One 4 and Melodyne is very simple. Once you have your audio recorded, you can right-click, select the audio preferences section, and click Edit with Melodyne. Once it's processed, you'll see in the Edit section Melodyne is integrated with a transport. This makes it very easy to just select an audio file and move it around. Now I won't go into the details of Melodyne because it can be very complex, but as an overview, you can see the note here and the tuning in Sense, and you can click and drag it around. In order to sync audio and video, you can quickly drag your video and put it inside the transport. Now you'll see your video pop up, and you can link it or unlink it to the transport. When you press play, your audio will play, and when you press stop, the video will go to the beginning. You can also set video offset, among other tools, like adding more video, and even enabling the audio of the video if there is one. Makes it very quick and easy to work with syncing in movie using feet and frames. Make sure you enable this here. Routing MIDI through Studio One 4 can be very simple. To set up new devices, go to Preferences and click on External Devices. You can click Add and you'll see a menu of preferences. You can add a new keyboard, new instrument, and a new control surface. Keyboard is what we're going to use to route all the MIDI input from the Novation. So I'm just going to go ahead and name this. Notice that you can select the MIDI channel that you want to receive MIDI from. In this case, we're receiving from MIDI channel 1, but we can leave them all enabled. Right here, make sure to select your device. In my case, the Impulse. You don't need to send MIDI to any device. One of the advantages of Studio One 4 is that you can send MIDI from any keyboard into a specific instrument. So we'll get to that later. Now we've had our new Novation device. Now in order to send the MIDI from the Novation into my synth, I'm going to have to add a new instrument. Here I'm adding an external bass synth. And I'll be sending to MIDI channel 4, which is the MIDI channel I've already preset in my synth. This is going to be routed to the Pro 40 MIDI, which is my Sapphire Pro 40. Once you're done with this, you can quickly create a new instrument and send the MIDI. Selecting the MIDI routing can be very simple. You can select the TX81Z as the instrument, and this is going to send MIDI directly to that. Now, in order to hear your synth, you're going to have to add an audio track. This ensures that the audio being received from the synth into the interface is being monitored and recorded. In my case, this is input 2. And you can see and hear that the bass is being played. Now, if I want to send multiple MIDI channels to different devices, I can set up more instruments. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new instrument. And this is a drum machine that receives MIDI information from all 16 channels. So I'm just going to go ahead and select a couple of channels and create 2 new instruments, one for each channel. Make sure you select the send to the correct MIDI out port that you've connected prior. I'm going to make sure I'm going to name this channel as well. Once I've created these devices, you can see I can send MIDI information to them. So let's go ahead and send to channel 10. This I'm going to rename to my Novation keyboard because this is just a MIDI controller that will receive from MIDI channel 1 and send specifically through that instrument to the MIDI output channel. So in a nutshell, this MIDI channel receives information from MIDI channel 1 key station and then translates that into channel 10 if we're using this instrument, channel 11 if we're using this instrument, or channel 4 if we're using the TX81Z. So let's go ahead and use channel 10. Notice once I play the MIDI, you won't hear any audio on this track. That's because we have to set up a new track for the audio of the RM50. Now, if you don't see your audio input, you might have to route that. Go to your I/O setup and add the channel you want to receive the audio from. In my case, channel 5. Hit apply, and now you can select input 5. Once you've recorded enabled, you should be able to listen to the track. Oh, I think the routing was in input 6. Okay. So now you can hear this is channel 10. And if I create a new audio track and call it RM5011, we can keep the same input. But here we would have to change the instrument. So I can go quickly to channel 11. Once I record and enable this, it's going to be a different sound. Switching back and forth can be very simple with a drop-down menu, and by adding external instruments and devices, you can quickly control your MIDI routing. You also have a nice MIDI monitor. For every note sent and received, you're going to see the different outputs. In my case, it's sending to from input 1 to output 11. If I switch this to 10, it's going to send from input 1 to output 10. The same with this TX81Z, receives input 1 and goes to channel 4. You can also filter from node on, node off, aftertouch, messages, poly pressure, etc. to troubleshoot any pre-existing MIDI feedback loops, or just to get a general sense of your routing.